Right. I am going to turn things over to, we have Shannan Stanke, who is a resource facilitator with us with the Brain Injury Network, and Pam Webster. They're going to host us today. So take it away, ladies.
Hi there, everybody. Um, Thank you for attending. And first, I am just going to talk about why we're having this webinar. Since I've been with the North Dakota Brain Injury Network, and before that, I met them because I was on a webinar after my little book came out, and I wrote the book because people were asking, does my husband have CTE? And so CTE is chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And it's a condition, it's a degenerative disease that happens as a result of repetitive head injuries. And we can talk a little more about that. We can answer lots of questions, but I want to make sure we have enough time to show you first, what does it look like in a person when you don't know what's happening? I get a lot of inbox messages asking, do you think my husband has CTE? And, there's no way to know because it's not diagnosable in the living yet. It's getting close. But I want to introduce you to someone that's become very special to me. The reason that I am here today is because of the information that my husband died due to a degenerative disease to his brain that was caused by being an offensive line, defensive line, and cowboy. And we would not have had that opportunity to get that diagnosis if someone wouldn't have done it first. And the person who blazed that trail for us, whom I'm so thankful for, is Pam Webster. She's on here as Zoom user. And so I'm going to share my screen to give you a little background on who she is. Let's see here. I'm thinking if we go right here, let's see, I should be able to. Okay. So are you guys seeing my browser here? Yes, I think we got. Oh, so if you were to Google the movie Concussion, this would come up. So if you haven't seen the movie Concussion with Will Smith, that is the movie that came out, I think, in 2015. And it was about Dr. Bennet Omalu, who came from, I believe, Kenya. And he was working at UPMC, at the University of Pittsburgh, and he was asked to do some autopsies on Pittsburgh Steelers that were dying by suicide and other violent deaths. And something caused him to suspect something deeper, and he found a way to look at the brain post-mortem from an angle that revealed something that was going on that you couldn't see in a scan or a traditional autopsy. And that is the tangles and the tau deposits involved with chronic traumatic encephalopathy on a micro level. So I highly suggest watching the movie, but it's full of lots of information. So now the very first person that Bennet Omalu builds a relationship with while he's trying to get to the bottom of this mystery is Mike Webster. And Mike Webster was a Pittsburgh Steeler, Iron Mike Webster. He was portrayed by, oh gosh, what is that actor's name? I can't remember. This guy right here, this one right here. I'll have to look it up. And David Morse, there he is. But he actually looks a little more like this. It was a very very dramatic beginning to the movie is how it starts. And because of the diagnosis that Dr. Omalu was able to obtain through Mike Webster, he went on in the movie to do 3 more. And then it really took off from there, the whole diagnosis of CTE. And As we know, it hasn't gotten very far because the NFL doesn't want it to. So fast forward to the year 2018 when I lost my husband in a similar fashion. That's my husband. And so you can all look me up. I've been on webinars in the past, and now I'm with the North Dakota Brain Injury Network. So my story is more about how everyday people are getting CTE, because I thought that you had to be in the NFL to get CTE. It never crossed my mind, never crossed my husband's mind. We never had the conversation. If I knew then what I know now, I think I would have done things differently, which can also be part of the conversation and the questions too. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen, get back to Pam. I want to let Pam talk about the really, really important topic of how do we not see this? What does it look like from the family's point of view when the rest of the world doesn't know what's going on behind those closed doors? How does it accelerate? I know for both of us, we've shared that there's chaos, and that chaos doesn't stop after they're gone. It continues. And so you know what, Pam, you go ahead and start. And is there a way to make her the main screen here? Can everyone just see Pam alone, or is that yeah, that I'm not sure. But yeah, Carly, you do the tech stuff with making Pam the main person here, and we'll just let her take it away.
Yeah, once she starts talking, it will. It's under speaker,
Perfect.
so who's ever speaking should pop in.
Okay. I'm Pam Webster. I was married to Mike for 28 years. First, we played in Pittsburgh for 17 years and then on to Kansas City to end his career. Towards the end of his time in Pittsburgh, he started having personality changes, which is, now we know, part of the CTE, I guess you can say it, diagnosis, pre-diagnosis. We can't tell if they had CTE until after they died. There's not a test right now to tell us that. There's a lot of symptoms. And what's interesting, and actually I just read it last night, that it's not always concussions. Most of the time it's head injuries, it's head impact. So that explains why Mike had CTE, because he had gone to a doctor one time and he said, "You look like you've been in, 25,000 car accidents." And, you can imagine how many times he's hit his head being at the center position. But back to his symptoms, he just wasn't Mike. He was more distracted, more easily upset, headaches, aggressive, not taking care of things like he did, which he always did. But you saw just little glimpses that something wasn't right. When we finished in Pittsburgh, which was really traumatic for Mike, and went to Kansas City, the symptoms became worse in a very, very rapid way. Some people hang on forever. Mike, and I think it's because of his position that he played in football, went from having bursts of anger, a lot of paranoia, not able to concentrate, feeling left out. Like one Christmas, he would sit in the background, Christmas was his favorite holiday. He loved it. He would sit in the background and just kind of observe and not really take part of things. So there's many, many, many different things I hear from a lot of wives and girlfriends and family members. It doesn't just pertain to football anymore. That are these symptoms of CTE? Yeah, they could be. There's many things now that we know about CTE. Back then, we knew nothing. I got blamed for a lot of it. We went through a really hellish nightmare of probably 2 to 4 years, and then it continued to his death. But it progressed so rapidly. He went from being very involved as a father to very standoffish on the sidelines, more observing it, not really being a coach, but really just observing it. He couldn't decide what he wanted to do after football. And I think that was directly related to his CTE. He couldn't concentrate. We started having, some minor problems, which, became major problems after retirement, but his personality was no longer Mike. And that, I think, is one of the dead giveaways. he described his mind and his thinking process as tangled fishing wire one time. And I think that's perfect because a lot of people don't understand that. If you haven't walked the CTE journey, it's really, really hard to explain to somebody what it's really like, because a lot of people don't take you seriously. You know, especially with an athlete, you'll get blamed a lot for it because they're superhuman and these things shouldn't happen to them. So, you know, I'll be glad to answer any kind of questions you have. But there's a lot of rapid, not just mental and emotional, but, you know, physical symptoms too, the headaches, the body. Some people get like tremors. Some people can't walk. Their balance is off. They can't concentrate. There's just many things that are CTE, maybe not diagnosed as CTE till later on, but you see the puzzle coming together when you can look back after the diagnosis and say, okay, this is what was happening. It wasn't me, it wasn't the family, it was CTE.
Pam, will you talk to us about who Mike was, the guy you married? Bring us way back because
Way
those
back.
changes, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Mike and I met at the University of Wisconsin. I worked in the ticket office and University of Wisconsin, the stadium was like a horseshoe. So the ticket office was right next to where the guys came in to practice and went onto the field. So we were set up by another girl that I worked with that was married to a football player. And it was kind of a blind date. He was very different than what I had imagined. He wasn't like, you know, the typical jock, really confident in that. He was more quiet. He came from a really kind of broken family, which, you know, a lot of football players do, because football is kind of like the military. It gives a purpose and a sense of structure and family for the guys. Mike was kind. He was ferocious on the field, but off the field, you know, you'd see him at the zoo waving to the bears or opening a car door, or just talking to the average guy. You wouldn't know he was who he was unless somebody told you. He was a player's coach, meaning that on the sidelines, he coached just as much as he played. So we all thought he had a coaching career in his future, and that just didn't work out in Pittsburgh. Mike was very much a family man and really loved his children. That was his life off the football field. It was definitely his family.
So when things started to change, you were probably the first one to notice, and, you know, or maybe the kids, or how did that gradually, and I'm just saying, because that's what it was in our family, and I've heard other accounts of this, and I want to hear the way it went in your household, how it was when nobody else knew the things that were happening, and then when things started to leak out, kind of in that in-between stage until you finally couldn't hide it anymore.
Well, right. And then remember, when it happened to me, there was no diagnosis. We didn't know what we were going through. It was hell. It was not pretty. A lot of people blamed me. I must have done something to Mike to make him behave this way. Or some people said he must be on drugs. He was drinking. He wasn't a drug user, wasn't drinking. He just wasn't Mike. The changes came on like so rapidly and partly I think because football is so structured and you're told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, that when that structure is gone, I think some of the symptoms came on faster because he didn't really have a purpose. So he had more time on his hands and his brain, which was not thinking. So we moved out of Kansas City. We lived in hotels for about 6 months and got a house in Wisconsin. I think we were only in the house under a year and it got foreclosed. He had gone through all of our money, all of our savings. I tried to find out where it went. And that's part of CTE too, is maybe not being the responsible person you were, but also having fits of anxiety, fits of paranoia, which is a very common thing that I've talked to many wives and girlfriends about. They're very paranoid. You know, they're very suspicious. Their moods can flip on a dime. Like when I would walk into the room, if the picture of me was on his desk, and if it was face down, I knew I did something wrong or I was in trouble. If it was face up, we were okay. And, you know, he didn't take part like he used to take part in things. He didn't pay bills. He wasn't honest. He wasn't lying. Physically, you know, he was going downhill with physical symptoms as well as mood swings, aggression, just anger at everybody. It just, I can't describe all the changes. All I can say is it was just not Mike anymore. You were like talking to the man, but he wasn't there. Like the lights are on, but nobody's home. We only lasted a short time in Wisconsin. We couldn't really figure out where to go after football in Kansas City because we didn't have a plan. Because way back then, life didn't come with a playbook, you know, and I mean, life after football didn't come with a playbook. Mike wasn't doing well. So we had kind of the perfect storm. We went back home, which was a mistake, but we couldn't go to Pittsburgh because of the way he got kind of ousted in Pittsburgh by the, you know, the Steelers, and they led him to believe he was going to be on the coaching staff. And one day he came home and said, they don't want me. They want me as a coach. They don't want me as a player. And I could just see the brokenness in him, which is really too bad because he would have made an incredible coach had he not gotten sick. But it manifests itself in so many different ways, from a simple thing like writing a letter. If he couldn't express himself, he'd try to write a letter, but it was a ramble on letter on a yellow legal pad, and it went on forever. And it made no sense. It was hard to even read the letter to get done with it. It's just really sad because this great guy and this family. Another thing is he became reclusive. You know, he didn't stay in touch with any of the people. We didn't, you know, he really became more of an introvert, or he would drive places and get lost. There's so many facets to CTE. There's just not one. And there's, you know, now we know the difference is now we know we can identify it. We know how to deal with it better, not the best, but through all this, I think my purpose has been, you know, just helping other people, you know, walk this walk. It's just really a maze, and you don't always do the right thing. But if you're learning something from it or sharing, like you do right here, you're sharing with other people your story so you can help them figure this out. It's you know, it's not pretty, and you feel as a friend, a spouse, a family member, just a terrible sense of loss.
Well, and you, not only did you lose a husband, your kids lost a dad that, you know, and there's a whole social network that breaks down while that
right
happening. And by the time they're gone, you know, what was left of your social support, you know, did you have any social support when he was gone?
Not even, you know, a lot of times I was even questioned by my only family members and friends, and, you know, his family blamed me forever. And it was really isolated. That was then. I think things are so different now, and people aren't afraid to reach out and say stuff. You know, remember way back then, quite often they just thought, oh, well, he played football, he deserves this, that they got paid a lot, or he was on steroids. They had just had so many mean excuses for blaming a guy when, you know, he got sick. Really wasn't his fault. He didn't know what was happening. I mean, now we know, okay, if you're going to play 17 years, your body is going to take a toll. But the difference is that was then, this is now.
There's a question in the chat, and she asked, were there times when the old Mike came back and then he disappeared again, or once this shift occurred, he didn't seem to come back? Also, did he have any awareness of this shift? And I can speak to that as well, but I want to hear if
yeah, definitely. There was times where he would act out and like be not under control of himself and not really understand what was happening. But when it was all over, there was a sense of grief about what happened and not really acknowledging, you know, what really happened. It's really hard to describe, but he'd have fits of anger, like one time he came home and was angry about something and started slashing pictures on the wall, and we lost all our football pictures then. We don't have any memorabilia. Yes, it can happen. And also, you'll see the old person back, and they were slightly aware that something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. Like it's not, like, imagine your car not working and it's not working, but you can't diagnose where it's not working. And that was kind of what we lived, and it was very sad. You'll see glimpses of the old person, but the old person as they were is gone. CTE, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I was going to say CTE is like a different kind of cancer. It just kind of eats away at the brain, eats away at the body. It has no manners. It's lousy. It sucks. I always say CTE sucks. It's really a nasty, nasty thing. And a lot of times people are, afraid to talk about it. The guys have their pride. They're not always going to say, I think that's me. I've had guys call me and say, I'm showing this. Do you think that's me? Or wives will say, mine's not the only story. There's worse stories. There's better stories, but mine was the first story.
So I can speak to that because I think that's part of the self-blame was because he wasn't totally gone. There were glimpses of, so there was the chaos where, again, the same thing where my gentle giant went tearing through the house, throwing furniture and, or jumped out of a moving vehicle and,
right.
Things like that. But then the next weekend when he was going to a cowboy mounted shooting, he was just everybody's favorite guy again.
Right,
and
right.
So 1 week prior to my husband's death, to the day, Jason Hairston died by suicide as well. And so his wife, Kirsten, I've chatted with her a bit on Messenger. They had an article come out where she said, you people don't understand. You don't know what happened behind closed doors. You got the Jason that was up there on that mountain hunting and at his best. I got him when he was stressed, when the bills were due, and that wasn't pretty. And so that's the way it was for us. But anytime you add stress or adrenaline to CTE, I think that's where and the anger.
Exactly. And part of that is, just my opinion is when they're in a familiar surrounding, like maybe it was the rodeo, that was familiar. His brain connected with that, but maybe not with you. It's that nasty, and we're just on the tip of figuring this thing out. But yeah, she's exactly right. And the hell you live through is you're afraid to say things because if you say it, it might trigger them. So you kind of keep it all inside. And if you talk to anybody, nobody believes you. Now it's a little different because I think people are more self-diagnosing and being a little more aware of what the symptoms are. Back then it was horrible.
We've also talked, you and I, about how the piece of information. So we both talked to women who have lost their husbands and wondered, did my husband have CTE? And, the importance of that piece is it sets not only the wife free from self-blame, but also the children from thinking that there's broken DNA, that there's just a fluffy mental illness gene floating around, and they might also feel that way when they hit midlife. But to know that there's an actual bruise on a brain instead of a monster in your head, so that you can say, oh no, you aren't going to feel suicidal because you inherited a mental illness. If you do, we're going to look at your head injury history first. And I think that's really important because it saves lives in that way. But then also now too, what would you do differently if you knew then what you know now, Pam?
Everything. I think it's really important, like you were mentioning, the family members. There's just not a lot of support groups for the children and they suffer immeasurably. They only had glimpses, like the older two had some good times with Mike. The younger two, not so much. And then Garrett, bless his heart, he had to take care of Mike by himself when I was having the kids, when we were separated and I was in Wisconsin, the kids were going to school and I was mom and dad and had to work. You know, it's like all of a sudden the money's gone. So you have to face issues because they can't work. They can't hold down a job. They can't do anything, or they'll have grand ideas of what they is. But the family is very, very important. And that loss and that blame, that has to be, you know, addressed. I tried to get a support group going with the NFL, but of course it went nowhere. I would do everything differently because, and I'm just going to touch on this. I don't want to offend anybody, but for a while I lost God. I wondered what happened, you know, why things were so hard. And he was always there. I didn't want one more person telling me what to do, how was it blame, feeling guilty, all that stuff. And now I realize that he's going to help me through the storm. It gave more stability to my life now. Now I'm a better person for going through it. Do I wish I could go through it? Why was it Mike and not somebody else? I think Mike had that kind of impact with players, coaches, and the NFL. And that's why it was important for him to be first. There are so many things I could have done better because now I know they weren't personal things that were directed at me, because a lot of times as women and caregivers, and probably men too, you take things personally. With CTE, you can't take it personally. It's just a beast. And you've got to have structure. You've got to have quiet. You might have to work harder than you've ever worked in your life. And your family is going to be really affected by this. So as much as you can do to keep things calm at home and not blame yourself and still have a little bit of a life, you're not going to have a great life for a while. But there's so much more support now, so many women and men, and that will offer you love, prayer, support. I think those are all things that are, you know, like so important.
You know, with that slow decline, I know, okay, so in the on the scientific level, I've heard and I've read and learned that CTE, the stages run inverse to Alzheimer's. So with Alzheimer's, those stages start with memory loss and end with, you know, flight risk, you know, bizarre behavior, whereas CTE starts with the bizarre behavior, the flight risk, the escalations in moods, and then if they stay around, it mellows out into more of a memory loss type of a situation. And one of the really beautiful examples of a relationship that's riding the waves of CTE is with the Adamleys, Mike and Kim Adamley.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If I knew then what I know now, I can actually put my finger on things that I would have done differently. When you said things like the first thing he did was stop taking care of things around the house. I will say just an hour before this webinar, a friend called me and we were chatting about some things that are going on with her family, and her husband used to you know, be involved in sports, lots of concussions. And, you know, she said, I just don't know why he's not doing things around the house. And I said, we might need to start taking a look at that and kind of keep your finger on that for a while and start doing some things in the relationship to turn things another way. Because if I knew then what I know now, I mean, I've still got a tree in my pasture that was down 4 years before my husband died. And I wondered, why isn't he getting rid of that? He doesn't leave things undone like that. And it's still there to this day. It'll be 6 years after now since he died next week. So 10 years that tree has been there. But, you know, back to the relationship part of it, I know that neuroplasticity piece in the brain where what you repeat repeats, and you can change behaviors by repeating. You know, I know if I look back at different things that where you said there were weird conversations and weird things scribbled on paper, and my husband did the same thing where he would start really kindergarten level arguments with me. And I didn't understand why. And I would kind of remove myself and look at it from an observer and think, I need to set boundaries. And I didn't know what was happening, but I could have turned that around. Instead of letting them go on and on and on, I could have said, do you need a nap? I
Mhm.
know your brain is tired.
Yeah.
And my
I
husband got fresh concussions, so he had
mhm.
CTE that we didn't know of and fresh concussions. So that brain fatigue was real.
Right, right. And one of the things that Dr. Omalu helped me understand, we were taking him to a meeting one day, and I said, why was there such extreme things with Mike? Either extreme spending, extreme anger, um, all those things, like even things like just everything extreme, I mean, it's so many different things. And he said the frontal lobe is where all that's governed, and that governor is gone once they have the concussions and the brain injuries. It's gone. So when they start one of their things, there's no end, I mean, and that's why we go back to, okay, we would have handled things differently because we knew that this was possible. It's like I tried to get money. Mike spent every investment we had. And back then, my name wasn't on anything. I couldn't get anything. He started hanging out with people that weren't the best people for him and got taken in by many people financially that took advantage of him. And Mike wasn't Mike anymore. I had a high school girl I was telling you about that's important to share because, we kind of forget about the kids and how they view their dads, and wanted her dad to walk her down the aisle for her graduation. And she was afraid to ask him and afraid what might happen if he exploded on that. And I said, honey, what you're talking to is no longer your dad. It's the same person, but his brain is different.
So when things started to decline, did you hide things? Were you able to hide it or accommodate, do you feel?
Now I mean, I remember one day Garrett went to school. Living in Wisconsin wasn't the best idea. We thought, we always went home for vacation. So we thought, oh, that would be, there wasn't anything for Mike to do. And he kept going to Pittsburgh. But that's kind of not my point, getting off my point here. Garrett went to school one day and some kid well, Garrett's a big guy, but some kid decided to pick on him and swung his backpack and hit Garrett in the back of the head. And I get a call from an ambulance. They're taking him to the hospital, and he got home, or we got to the hospital or something. And she says, what's your insurance? And I said, well, we have it. And she said, no, you don't have any insurance. Mike never paid the bill. So we lost things in storage garages because he just kind of forgot to pay the bill. Or at one point in Pittsburgh, this is way back in Pittsburgh, Christian children, Mike had the biggest heart for Spina Bifida, Christian Children's Fund. He just had a big heart for anybody that was hurting. So he was supporting 13 children. And I'm going like, there wasn't one envelope, there was 13 envelopes. And he didn't have those kind of perimeters where he knew, like it just kind of was gone, and those are just small things, that you just have to deal with. But there's just a lot with CTE.
And leading to that, one of the big things maybe people aren't asking, but so did you get a bunch of money after he died? I know the answer to that, and from the movie.
No, I mean, we struggled. I didn't know at one point, and I couldn't find out. I went from having we were never paid what they are paid now. And they aren't really helping now. I mean, Mike helped everybody, but it was a different life back then. At his top level, he made $350,000. When we started, his contract was for, I think, $16,000 a year, $18,000 a year with an $8,000 signing bonus. So you can see how things have changed, and there's no like widows or pension funds or stuff like that. We didn't get anything. He went through everything and everything was hid. he had a different life, which is also a symptom of CTE. They have this kind of like private dark life that they're living that you don't know about. And we did get some money from the concussion settlement, but it was take it or leave it. It wasn't what we wanted, what we deserved. It was, okay, here's our offer, take it or leave it. And it was split 7 ways. So that doesn't really cover a whole lot. I had a lot of expenses, and so I get no pension. I get that. I get Social Security, and we're struggling. I'm not going to lie about it. I have tried to get help from the NFL, and they, even family members have said, you've gotten help twice and you shouldn't get any more. And, we tried to contact one of the, help agencies run by former football players, and they said, we already helped you, we're not going to help you again. So it's really hard because there aren't many places. And I don't want to feel sorry for me, but at 73, you can't work as hard as you could at 50 something. And I've always been one to take care of my kids, and my kids live with me. And we've got 2 daughters that have been directly influenced by, Mike's CTE and his bizarre behavior, and had addiction and alcohol problems, and another son that's got anger problems. And then there's Garrett, so it's a very, very hard life on the family. It really destroys the family. And no, we don't have a lot of money. If we did, I wouldn't be the way I am right now.
And our next 2 videos will be how Pam looks so fabulous at 73, and then also children of CTE.
It's important. The CTE children thing, it's like more important than you realize, because they can't figure out what happened to dad. And it's like children of divorce. Did I do something wrong? No. And it's even like people will be really mean. You don't get a lot of them, but there'll be the 2% that when you post on Facebook, there'll be the 2%. Well, he was using steroids, which if he did, I do not know. Mike didn't share a lot about football with me. If he did, it was at a time they were legal. If he didn't, he worked very, very hard for those muscles. He was in the weight room 3.5 hours, maybe sometimes twice a day. Everything he did to the max. And so they were honest. It was a different time back then. Very, very hard. But I think there's things we can do now to make it less. It's not going to be pretty no matter what you do. CTE isn't pretty, but there's more help out there, and a lot of people that care.
There are a lot of neuroprotective measures that people can take, and we don't know what they are exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more than we think. And I've heard that certain doses of testosterone are actually neuroprotective on some
Mm-hmm.
level, but we don't know what that is. So disclaimer,
Uh-huh.
nobody should be experimenting with such things.
Mm-hmm.
Different vitamins, different medications, different diabetes medications are neuroprotective. And I think that because there isn't a specific diagnosis yet where they can say, this is CTE, here's a blood marker, here's what it looks like, here's how we treat it. We're not there yet. And that's a long way, I think.
And if you're a guy or a woman, CTE is not the cheapest thing to treat. It's not like, okay, you can go in and tell your doctor you need an antidepressant. It's hard to get help. It's hard to get diagnosed. It's hard to get the funding that's there for people who need it, even for football guys. I think the NFL is doing some things better. I think there's a lot of room to grow yet.
There is a question. Oh,
okay, go ahead.
There's a question about that, about the NFL. If the soft helmets, the soft shell helmets that they're starting to allow, if you think those are helpful, what are your opinions on that?
I think that would be something you'd have to talk to Garrett. Garrett's a sports expert, not me. We have one thing that we both talked about, Garrett and I, is the studies and how they can't figure out, this sounds so simple, but a simple thing like a woodpecker hitting his head on a tree, repetitive in times, he doesn't have brain injury. Why? I mean, what's that secret inside floating around? I think anything we're going to do, but what's interesting is, okay, this was probably Mike's been gone 22 years. So this was probably 22 years ago. I did an interview and he says, well, what do you think is going to happen with CTE? And I said, the things I'd like to have happen is like MRIs, brain scans before they get on the field and at the end of the year. So you can kind of start telling if there's some swelling or something. I don't know how they do that, but also just shorter careers. You're not going to see a lot of, Jason Kelsey, he knew enough to retire. Who knows if he'll have, brain injuries down the road. I haven't never talked to either one of them, but they seem like a very nice family. But, you don't wish this upon anybody. Soft helmets, I guess, I definitely could check with Garrett and get back to you on that. Anything that would help. Some of the rules are different now. We don't have the hits that we used to have. Mike came back from when he played Oakland just a mess. He knew that was going to be a rough game. It was so different back then than it is now.
And, I think there's also the finding that, it's the dose, they call it a dose of hits, but it's not the loss of consciousness, it's the repetitive
hits. Now, yeah, they're saying that more and more. Yeah.
Subconcussive.
Yeah.
But then also the propensity, you can have two people have the same football career, one gets CTE, one doesn't, and then another situation where they both have CTE and one is symptomatic and the other one isn't. So I think that's another element of it as well.
And that's something that I'm sure within studies, within 10 years, they're going to have more answers, for that. And, it may go back to childhood. It may go back to in utero. Who knows? I mean, they'll find answers. I am glad they're doing research on it, but more research needed. It's just, you think you're alone with the CTE story, and it's scary, but there is so many people that care.
And back to where you are today, where you and I, the conversation you and I have had about that chaos just still following you, because it does still affect the kids, the grown children. It still affects the way that we learn to do things, the way that we learn to operate in that chaos. And somehow it follows you. And there is a lack of people, stepping up to help. And I will disclose that on Facebook recently, Pam and Garrett have shown a picture of the water that they're dealing with. They're living in a situation where their water is brown, and where they've struggled to stay in the apartment or the home that they're in.
Yeah.
It's just been one struggle after another.
That's it's been like that. And you don't want to feel like your life is one big GoFundMe. But it's like, why, I'll look at Garrett and say, why is everything to the extreme for us? And why does it keep on being extreme for us? And we have to keep getting up. And, that's one thing. Mike got knocked down, but he'd get back up. And that's kind of what you have to do. It's just really, really hard. But, I was going someplace with that thought, but, I can't remember what I was going to say now. I'll think of it.
Well, it's that, oh, here we go. So we have a comment question. Over in Minnesota, I officiate high school football, and players are allowed to wear the soft helmet shell during games. A few players were wearing them last week during their varsity, which I think is a great thing. And I agree. And it still comes down to the repetitive hits. Like we even talk about with North Dakota Brain Injury Network, if you had whiplash, that's still, your brain is moving around in the skull. And if you have inflammation in place, it really comes down to, if you've already got inflammation going on and you don't reduce that inflammation, you're just set up for another hit, another subconcussive hit. And so I think getting that inflammation down is key. And that's, I think, why knowing if there's, like you had said, Pam, having a scan before the season and then having some protocols in place. Well, how do we reduce that inflammation so you can continue to play? Because now here's the other part of it. Your husband and my husband, they were very competitive. They loved to play hard. And so, you know, if we would have ever at any point said, oh, Greg, you need to stop, you know, competing in cowboy mounted shooting. You don't get to train horses anymore. He would have said, well, life's not worth living then. I'm going to
Exactly.
continue. And I would rather die doing what I love
Well,
than live a weird life of not doing those things. So how about Mike?
Mike loved football. He was the best at it. It was his life. It gave him what he needed, and he loved football. I don't think the NFL loved him back enough, and I don't think they've honored him enough, or helped him enough. You know, it's like really sad for me when I look back, and I think this poor man gave everything to football, got probably more awards than any lineman has so far, but he never got to hold his grandchildren. You know, he never got to experience life and how life would have been so different for us had he lived, and that. But I think it's just, you can't figure it out. You know, it's like I've talked to my sister about this. I said, you know, sometimes when I go back and I start thinking about it, and that's one of the reasons I'll just mention, I have never seen the movie Concussion. Garrett has never seen the movie Concussion. We were not like included in that movie at that time. So you won't see, you know, you'll see like part of our lives there, but we were never really part of the movie. So I can't really speak for a movie. And I know that there's another movie right now, but I can't go there. It's like when Melanie said, my sister Melanie, who's a nurse, said to me, Pam, it's a town you can drive through, but you can't visit. And that's just what sometimes it's just really, really painful to go back there. And, you know, football season starts and you get triggers of, why did this happen? Was that really my life? I used to walk by, you know, football jerseys and wonder, did Mike really play? Was that really our life? You know, and as I'm cleaning houses now, I go, you know, someday I won't have to clean houses anymore. You know, someday this will be okay and we can get by. But you know, his story needs to be told as your husband's. I mean, you go through these things and look at the friendships you make because of it. And I still think, you know, part of that is God's operating through us. You know, my faith is really, really strong. And that's part of the reason why I'm now. I always say, if Mike and I met now, he'd probably he'd for sure, he'd love me more now. And I would love him more now than I would back then, because I've really grown a lot as a person and gotten a whole lot more compassion than I ever did back then. But and support doesn't always come from your teammates or your family. Sometimes it comes from really unexpected places. I haven't had a lot of teammates or, you know, especially wives from Pittsburgh come up and say much to me in all these years. I've had more from other areas and other venues, you know, give me wonderful support. And I could never really figure that out, you know, and it's just really a hard journey, but you know, we're here to help each other.
I think you're right. I think at this point, it comes down to so many unanswered questions, and there's nothing, you know, it's not a hard defined thing, and people shy away from what's unfamiliar or scary. And I think that's part of why the conversation isn't happening. So anything else you want to say? But I mean, we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, I'll take any questions. You know, I think one of the things is, you know, people have said, well, didn't any players help Mike? And I think part of it was, and a lot of people can relate to this, men and women, athletes, non-athletes, whatever, they have a sense of pride. And especially with a football player, you have a sense of who you were, not what's happened now. And you're kind of embarrassed about that. You know, I mean, some of the things that happened to Mike, I go, you know, it's, how did that happen? How did he end up riding a bicycle and sleeping in train stations and having these horrible things happen? And I realize now, I wish I could have saved him from some of that. You know, that's part of what we talk about when we say we have the guilt that we carry and how you could have done things better. I don't know where my heart was then. But another thing that people should be aware of is, like, I mean, me and my kids have all been diagnosed or been told by counselors and doctors that we have PTSD. And you think, oh, they weren't in a war. Well, we were in a war, but a different kind of a war, a mental war, and a physical war, an emotional war. Verbal abuse is something, we don't talk about with CTE, but boy, did I get it. I just got told all sorts of things, and you start believing them after a while.
I will say, I think the reason why having these conversations too is so important is not only for people trying to get information, but I still will start to doubt, well, what did I go through? Was that true? Did I make that up? Is it my imagination? But then even you just saying, he stopped taking care of things around the house, or when he started to isolate himself, or he'd be in the middle of Christmas and not interacting. That was strange. Those are exactly the same things that we experience, and it's very validating. And we need reminders too that, okay, what you went through was real, and and CTE is real. And I think, the longer it goes, the longer society doesn't embrace it, the longer it gets, pushed away as, not a real disease, or, just one more, you have to jump through one more hoop before we can accept this as a disease or define it. It's being prolonged, but yet all we have is our stories. All we have is, this is what happened to me, and it sounds like what's happening to you, or I need that information. I thank you for sharing everything, because it's helped me, and I know it's going to help others in the future, because now we have it recorded, and it's such an important story. And I'm so
right. And another thing I'll just mention really, really quick is I have a number of lady friends whose husbands, boyfriends played. They ended up breaking up, or in case, like we had a divorce. Well, the divorce was a no-fault divorce. Mike was sick, didn't know what he was doing. It was in the courts. I didn't know what I was doing. I wouldn't have done it. I regret the divorce now for many, many reasons. And I can't fix that. But just because you're divorced doesn't mean you didn't love that person. It means that CTE made it so hard to live with that person. And sometimes you have to take, like, the horse by the reins. You have to lead, because he can't, he won't, he isn't capable of leading. And I think that's why sometimes we can't be so hard on ourselves, because sometimes I really beat myself up. Why did I do that? Why wasn't I there? Why didn't notice this? Why couldn't I have been better? But, it's like, I'm better now. I'm better now, and I'm much more compassionate now.
Well, but Pam, even Greg and I stayed together, and we just kept getting more and more and more and more and more marriage counseling. And I kept setting more and more and more boundaries, and that didn't go well for us.
And what a marriage counselor would say to you, unless they've walked that CTE journey, isn't probably what I'd tell you to do, or somebody else who's been through CTE, because they're saying set boundaries. Well, you can't set boundaries with a guy with CTE, because it's like setting fences in the water. It's like, you can't do it. They're not capable of boundaries, and you never know, like, what person you're going to deal with at which day. Mike would come in and out of our lives, and we didn't know. He'd get lost one night. We'd feel sorry for him. Like, he was always welcome at the house. We had a really, he was always welcome. Mike and I both loved our kids. And he was distant from the kids, but he was always welcome. And holidays, maybe he'd drive from Pittsburgh to Ohio, and it would take him 4 days when it usually would take 11 hours. And he wouldn't come in and join us. He'd sit out in the car, but he'd want me to take a complete Thanksgiving dinner with his favorites out to the car. And, he'd rather sleep in the car than in the house. Or, some of the not so great things, like taking your kids' medication, spending their college funds, stuff like that. Those aren't things that a normal Mike would have done. Those are things that a CTE, engulfed Mike did.
Yes. My husband slept in the back of a horse trailer, and slept
Mhm.
out and moved out to the camper.
Yeah.
What is going on in the brain with that thought process? I don't know, but it's a similar
Mhm. And then
response.
as wives or husbands or whatever, you take it personally. And you might not at that time. And I know people say, oh, you're doing the best you could at that time. No, I wasn't doing the best I could. I was just getting by. I was just looking for an escape. I was just trying to get through one day to the next. I had to get a job. I didn't have skills. So I worked in a fast food restaurant cleaning ketchup off floors and cleaning urinals. That will humble you fast. It's just life humbles you with CTE. There should be more help, but we've got each other. But it is a horrible, horrible thing to live with. I think don't be scared, because there are people that understand and there's help out there. But there's a lot you can do just yourself to make things easier for you.
Well, and let's just imagine for a minute, what if after Mike was diagnosed, after the findings that Mike had, what if the NFL wouldn't have interfered and blocked all of the research and, planted dirty doctors? And, what if all of that wouldn't have happened? And then my husband got sick. There were several years in between your story and mine. If we would have had, if society would have been embracing CTE and had some treatments and had that knowledge, I'm here to tell you that my story wouldn't have ended the way it did, because I
Right.
would have taken action. I would have done everything in my power, to
Right.
make things better, not set those boundaries. I would have been saying, take
Right.
it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, you would have seen the red flags and noticed them. And we're too hard on ourselves. We think we did something wrong, instead of, oh my God, that disease sucks. It's horrible. It will eat your family. Here's what you can do to save yourself, and save your kids. Some of it's life. It's not going to go away. The damage is done. My kids, they're still suffering. My family is still suffering. We don't have all the answers, but because of Mike dying and your husband's death, we can talk about these things, and that's something we couldn't do 20 years ago.
Very true. Thank you so much
You are
for
welcome.
sharing. And, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat or chime in. And also, I'm available. If you can find my email on ndbin.org, you're welcome to send questions that way too, if you think of things later. I'm in the Fargo area of North Dakota, and I can help find answers or give validating information if need be.
I'm always glad to talk to people. I've gotten direct messages from a lot of people asking me questions, and even there was a guy that was going to commit suicide. He had played football, a big guy, and he wrote something on Facebook, and I said, oh my God, that sounds like Mike. Mike wouldn't have killed himself, because I think he knew the impact it would have had on the kids, but I bet he was there a lot of times. But this guy was, and I said, you know what? You've got CTE. You really, really need to get help. You need to talk to somebody. And then I think one of the CTE group founders from, I think, Rico Petrini, reached out to him and helped. So there is a network. And you look at, even with your husband, if we had that, that knowledge now, then things would be so different.
I know that the CLF helpline has really expanded and has been very helpful. They're going to be putting the North Dakota Brain Injury Network on their list of resources, so that, for help. And then, but also they're really good at navigating when people are having those emotional breakdowns, or if spouses want to reach out to them when it comes to navigating the whole CTE thing. Here in North Dakota, we're able to help with people and directing, for resources and give validation and support. And we've got, we have a lot of different things in place, like our Web Wednesdays. We have a concussion symposium coming up. We have in the spring, we have our Mind Matters conference. So it's happening. There are things happening nationwide where
and yeah, you're not alone anymore. You're not suffering this disease alone. And it's scary, but there's help out there. And it's not always help that's going to cost a lot of money. Sometimes you might have to do just the simple things like we've talked about. No confrontations. Confrontations trigger these guys and these gals. You don't want to do that. You just
We
want to have
can't
a
de-escalate.
no, you can't. It's just like, and they don't have control over it.
No, they don't. That's for sure. That is for sure. So what do you think the future holds for you, Pam?
Uh, I have no idea. I hope someday I can retire and maybe, go see places. And I really was the homemaker and I loved it. I wouldn't trade it for anything, but I didn't travel with Mike. I was home with the kids, even for a lot of games. He felt safer knowing that I was home with the kids and not at a game. So I really didn't have that, typical football player's life. And the last 30 years, we, either waited for a settlement, tried to get help. It's been hard. It's been really hard. I just want to live a simple life. I, want to see my kids healthy and someday be able to see my grandkids. I don't ask for much. Life has humbled me.
Carly, do you want to keep it open for questions or what would you like to do?
Well, I would like you to answer that last one. Where do you see it?
Oh,
For you.
that must be a CTE wife thing because it's tricky. It's because it's not what we expected, but I will tell you that this job with the North Dakota Brain Injury Network has been a dream come true. And I still can't believe they pay me to do it. But it's, helping others is when I feel alive because I lost everything that had meaning to me. And this has meaning. This is meaningful work. And it's, every day my heart breaks and rejoices with the things that I learn, the things that I see, and getting to see from this perspective how much the world is waking up to all of the knowledge about how concussions affect a life. And I know Carly she's been with NDBIN for several years and has created beautiful educational materials. I can just hand things out that she created and blast the world with education. So it's been, I am so glad to be out in life.
You're giving back, and just even the small things you say might help somebody immeasurably. Not feeling alone, feeling like a little bit in control, because you're out of control when it hits.
Chaos, back to that chaos, right?
Yep.
And, side note, so North Dakota Brain Injury Network, what we do screenings for people and all our services are free. So I go down to the homeless shelter every Monday and we do screenings and we help people identify with a short list of questions. Did you have brain injuries that are contributing to where you are in life today? And then what can we do to help you maybe turn that around? And we do this at the North Dakota State Penitentiary and other correctional facilities.
Yeah, there's so many, you're exactly right, because we forget, okay, we're talking concussions and football and athletes. We forget these brain injuries can happen to a lot of people, and that can be the reason things happen, violent things or whatever. So, I applaud you for doing that, because that's not always the easiest work to do. But, to do that and to connect with somebody and say, you know what, don't blame yourself anymore. You had a brain injury. This is how, this is how we can help. Thank you for doing what you do, both you and Carly and all the people out there, because it makes a difference.
Thank you for telling us the story. Thank you for blazing the trail.
Oh.
And because I wouldn't be here today if you wouldn't have played the part that you play.
Oh, well, thank you. I just wish Mike could have seen me, the person I am now, not the person who reacted to the crazy storm we were in. I didn't always do the best thing. And I think now I'm doing as best as I can and handling it a whole lot better.
You didn't know what you didn't know.
Exactly. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you both. Any last questions for these ladies or?
And we can answer questions in the future too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just send them.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
threw your email in the chat, Shannon. And there's lots of comments about thank you for sharing your story, and we appreciate your time for sure.
Thank you all for coming and gaining knowledge that you can now apply to your own lives and spread to others. And the more people know, the more people know. There should be a t-shirt.
Yeah, the more people know, the more people don't want to know.
Right.
That happens too sometimes. It's a kind of scary thing to ask about. I think Garrett even said that, and Garrett's really a knowledgeable, he could be your next guest sometime, but he would say, a lot of times he said the players don't talk about it, or, I'm just saying players because that was our field, because they're afraid they might have it. It's kind of scary. It's like talking about breast cancer or talking about another kind of cancer, and sometimes you're afraid to talk about it.
A lot of silence. I think that should almost be listed as a symptom, because that's part of what happened with us too, is that silence. They, just not saying anything and terrified to talk about what's going on in their head. And then
Yep.
a little comment here and a little comment there, and
Yeah.
you don't pick up on it.
Right. Because a lot of people think these guys, especially the athletes and like your husband in the rodeo, they think they're superhuman and they're not supposed to get these things. So,
That's so true.
yep.
Well, thank you ladies so much. We appreciate you.
You are welcome. You're more than welcome. And if there's any questions people would rather not do out loud, just send an email. It'll get to me or Shannon or you, Carly.
Yes, yes. We got one question: how to access the recording. You got to go back to the webinar link. I will copy it and throw it in the chat. The recording should be available usually by tomorrow, but I always say for sure by Friday afternoon it will be on the website, and then you can see the recording and request CEUs that way as well. Thanks for joining us. We'll sign off.
Okay, thank you guys.
Okay,
Thank you,
Love
Pam.
you, Shannon.
Love you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.